I always considered myself a pretty low-key, peace-loving person. My idea of a good time involves a quiet evening, a good book, and maybe tending to my small but mighty backyard compost pile. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that my humble efforts to be a good global citizen would land me squarely in the crosshairs of the most absurd, trash-obsessed HOA tyrant this side of the Mississippi. Drop a comment below and let me know if you've ever had your perfectly reasonable actions deemed an act of rebellion by a power-hungry HOA. Because this story, folks, is about how my recycling bins became weapons in a suburban war and how I uncovered a dirty secret about our HOA's trash tyranny. It all started when I moved into the picturesque community of Greenbriar Estates. The name itself promised manicured lawns, friendly faces, and a touch of eco-consciousness, right? I, Sarah, a recent transplant from a city that practically recycled air, was thrilled to set up my new, even more ambitious waste reduction system. I'd spent weeks researching the best composting methods, the most efficient ways to separate plastics by number, and where to drop off those hard-to-recycle items like old batteries and styrofoam. I had my standard blue bin for plastics and cans, a green bin for glass, and then my pride and joy: 3 separate bins for paper, cardboard, and mixed organics for my composting. Plus, I had a designated spot for e-waste and textile donations ready to go to charity shops. I was practically a one-woman recycling center, and my weekly trash output was barely a single kitchen bag. I was so proud of it, really. My neighbors mostly seemed impressed, or at least indifferent, offering polite nods as I wheeled out my rainbow of bins on collection day. I thought I was setting a good example, contributing to the community's supposed Greenbriar spirit. Enter Mildred Finch. Mildred was the kind of woman whose posture alone could enforce bylaws. She walked like she had a hidden ruler taped to her spine. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair a testament to unyielding control, not a single strand daring to escape its lacquered prison. She wore crisp, sensible pantsuits in muted tones, always perfectly pressed. Like she was perpetually ready for a corporate board meeting, not a walk around a suburban cul-de-sac. Mildred was the self-appointed, self-perpetuating president of the Greenbriar Estates HOA. She'd been elected years ago and had somehow managed to consolidate power to such an extent that dissenting voices had practically vanished. And Mildred, it turned out, hated my bins. She hated their number, their varied colors, their very existence as a deviation from her meticulously ordered universe. My first encounter with Mildred's wrath wasn't a confrontational one, not directly. It was sterile, bureaucratic, and utterly infuriating. A crisp official notice, almost too perfect in its formatting, tucked into my mailbox. Violation Code 7.3.c. Excessive waste receptacles. It felt like a joke. Excessive. I literally had less waste than anyone else on the street. The notice stated, in bold underlined text, that residents were permitted 1 standard trash bin and 1 standard recycling bin. My other 3 specialized recycling bins, apparently, were an eyesore and a deviation from community aesthetic standards. My compost bin, too, was singled out as a potential attractant for vermin. I actually laughed out loud. I genuinely thought it was some kind of new resident hazing ritual, a quirky introduction to suburban life. I politely emailed the HOA, explaining my comprehensive eco-friendly system and how it significantly reduced landfill waste, a benefit to the entire planet, let alone our little community. I even offered to consolidate my bins into a larger, more uniform container, perhaps paint them to match the aesthetic. I signed off, optimistically, hoping for a reasonable dialogue. Silence. No response. Not an email, not a phone call, not even a form letter. Just deafening, bureaucratic silence. A week later, another notice. This one, however, came with a fine, a crisp $50 for the continuing violation. That's when the humor drained out of the situation, replaced by a cold knot of annoyance in my stomach. Mildred wasn't kidding. This was serious. I tried calling the HOA office, a tiny windowless room in the community clubhouse that was almost always empty. I left voicemails, but they went unanswered. I even drove over once, hoping to catch someone, anyone, but the door was locked, the lights off. It felt like trying to argue with a ghost. So I decided to bring my case to the next HOA meeting, certain that once I presented my case to a broader group of residents, common sense would prevail. The meeting was a revelation, and not in a good way. Mildred perched at the head of a long table, presided over a room of mostly older residents who seemed either terrified of her or utterly complacent. Their faces blank, their eyes avoiding hers. It was like she held them in a silent thrall. When it was my turn, I stood up, feeling a nervous tremor but determined to be heard. I explained my recycling efforts again, more passionately this time, even showing photos of my neatly arranged lidded bins. I pointed out that reducing waste should be encouraged, not penalized, especially in a community named Greenbriar Estates. I talked about sustainability, about our shared responsibility. Mildred simply cut me off, her voice like sandpaper, dry and grating. "It's Ms. Hayes," she said, without even looking at my photos. "The rules are clear. 1 trash, 1 recycling. Your ... collection of receptacles is disruptive. Furthermore, your compost bin, while perhaps well-intentioned, could attract pests. My compost was practically a 5-star hotel for earthworms, not rats. It was so well-maintained, practically odorless. I looked around the room, pleading for a flicker of understanding. A few sympathetic glances, yes, a slight cough from Mrs. Rodriguez, but no one spoke up. The fine stood. And then, as if to put a period on her pronouncement, Mildred added, "And I suggest you reconsider your unconventional methods, Ms. Hayes, for the good of the community's order." This was no longer about bins. It was about control. It was about Mildred's unwavering, almost pathological need for conformity. I paid the fine, but it lit a fire under me. Slow, simmering rage. I started researching. I devoured every single page of the HOA bylaws, cross-referenced them with city ordinances on waste management, and even looked into local environmental initiatives and state regulations. What I found was interesting. While the HOA had general aesthetic guidelines, there was no specific mention of how many recycling bins were allowed, only that they should be neatly stored and not obstruct pathways. My bins were immaculate and placed off to the side of my driveway. The compost bin was tucked away out of sight from the street. Technically, I wasn't in violation of any specific rule. Mildred was operating on a vague interpretation of aesthetic standards and her own personal vendetta. The true escalation began a month later when Mildred, without any prior warning or discussion, implemented Operation Greenbriar Cleanup. Sounds good, right? Wrong. This meant mandatory removal of all non-compliant outdoor items, and she provided an incredibly vague list of what constituted non-compliant. This, of course, explicitly included my beloved specialized bins, but also innocent items like garden gnomes, certain types of lawn ornaments, and even specific colors of welcome mats. And the kicker: if you didn't comply within 24 hours, the HOA's designated compliance team, usually 2 bored teenagers from the next development over, armed with clipboards and a rusty pickup truck, would remove them, and you'd be charged a steep disposal fee of $100 per item. I watched from my window, my heart sinking as Mrs. Henderson, 3 doors down, had her charming hand-painted bird bath confiscated because it was unapproved outdoor decor. Mr. Chen lost his favorite wind chime. It was petty, vindictive tyranny in action, and it was spreading fear through the neighborhood. I decided to fight back, but smartly. I wasn't going to give Mildred the satisfaction of confiscating my bins. I continued to sort my waste meticulously, but I started storing my excessive bins in my garage. Every Tuesday morning before dawn, I would quietly wheel them out to the curb, swiftly empty their contents into the city's separate collection trucks, and then immediately retreat them back into the garage before the sun fully rose. It felt ridiculous, like I was running a clandestine operation, but it worked. This seemed to mollify Mildred for a while. Her direct ammunition against me was gone. But her gaze lingered on my driveway on trash day, as if she could still smell the separate paper and plastics, or sense the ghost of my compost bin. I knew she was waiting for her next move, and that move came. The next blow was delivered with a smug email from the HOA, followed by a physical notice. A new rule passed mysteriously without a resident vote or even a public announcement stated that all waste must be contained within HOA, provided uniform bins. These bins, naturally, were standard black for trash and a generic single-stream blue for recycling. All my meticulous sorting would be for naught. Everything would be lumped together. Worse, the email announced a new exclusive contract with Greenbriar Waste Solutions, a company I'd never heard of, to handle all trash and recycling for the community. Residents were no longer permitted to use city services or other private haulers. Effective immediately, the notice read. My spidey sense didn't just tingle, it screamed. This wasn't about aesthetics or pests anymore. This was about money. And something felt deeply wrong. This was the smoking gun. I knew it. I started digging into Greenbriar Waste Solutions. It wasn't easy. Its company seemed almost untraceable online. No public records beyond a basic generic business registration in a different state. No real physical address beyond a P.O. box. It was a phantom company. Desperate, I remembered my old college friend, Mark. Mark was a forensic accountant, the kind of guy who could find a needle in a haystack of corrupted financial data. I called him, laid out my entire absurd story, from the birdbath confiscation to the phantom waste company. He listened patiently, then chuckled. Sarah, you always did have a knack for getting into interesting situations. HOA fraud, that's a classic. Consider it a favor, but also I hate overreaching HOAs. He agreed to do some digging, mostly as a favor, but also because he genuinely seemed to enjoy the challenge of uncovering financial malfeasance. While Mark was working his magic, Mildred held a community forum to explain the new waste contract. She droned on about cost efficiency, streamlined services, and enhanced community aesthetics. She had charts and graphs, all vague and filled with buzzwords. I, however, had a question ready, carefully crafted to hit her where it hurt. Mildred, I began, standing up calmly. Could you tell us a bit more about Greenbriar Waste Solutions? Their website is remarkably sparse, and I couldn't find any public records of their incorporation or licensing in the state, nor any history of waste management services. A palpable hush fell over the room. Mildred's composure flickered, just for a second. Her smile, which had been plastered on her face, tightened. Ms. Hayes, she said, her voice now edged with irritation, that information is proprietary. Rest assured it is a fully compliant and reputable company chosen for the benefit of all residents. We have secured the best possible rates. It was a practiced deflection, a well-worn corporate bromide. But it wasn't enough. The unease in the room was now thick. Some residents exchanged worried glances. Others looked at me with a newfound curiosity. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Mark. His voice, usually calm and analytical, had a note of barely suppressed excitement. Sarah, he said, you're not going to believe this. I pulled some strings, went a few layers deep. Greenbriar Waste Solutions is a shell corporation. It's registered to an address that's nothing more than a mail drop in a different state, one known for lax corporate registration laws. And the sole listed director and beneficial owner is a Mr. Thomas Finch. My jaw literally dropped. Thomas Finch. As in Mildred Finch's husband, Thomas Finch. The very same Mark confirmed, a dry chuckle in his voice. And get this, the contract they signed with the HOA is hugely inflated. The fees they're charging for trash removal and single-stream recycling are almost double what the city charges for full, separated recycling. And for a fraction of the actual service, It looks like Mildred and Thomas are effectively running a private, mandatory, and highly profitable garbage collection scheme right under the residents' noses, funneling money from HOA dues directly into their own pockets. This was it. Not just overreach, but blatant corruption, financial fraud. This wasn't about a few bins anymore. It was about serious criminal activity. I immediately reached out to a local investigative journalist, Lisa Rodriguez, who I knew had a soft spot for community interest stories and a reputation for being fearless. I laid out everything: the escalating fines, the arbitrary rules, the opaque waste company, Mark's damning findings, and the personal profit angle. Lisa listened, her eyes gleaming with the predatory focus of a seasoned reporter. "Sarah," she said, "this is a gold mine. This is bigger than just a few recycling bins. This is a story about abuse of power and betrayal of trust." The next HOA meeting was absolutely packed. Word had spread like wildfire, fueled by whispers, social media posts, and my strategic accidental leaks of information to a few trusted neighbors who now saw the larger picture. Mildred, still oblivious to the full storm brewing, began her usual dry agenda, reciting minutes and discussing trivial landscaping issues. Just as she was about to move to new business, where she likely planned to rubber stamp some new arbitrary rule, Lisa, the journalist, calmly stood up. "Excuse me, President Finch," Lisa's voice, clear and amplified by a small portable speaker she'd brought, cut through the air, silencing the murmurs. "My name is Lisa Rodriguez, and I'm an investigative reporter with the local news. I have some questions regarding Greenbriar Waste Solutions and, frankly, your personal involvement with it." Mildred went utterly pale. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking almost ghostly. "This is a private HOA meeting, Ms. Rodriguez. You are not a resident. You are trespassing," she sputtered, her voice rising in a panicked screech. "No," Lisa retorted, her voice firm, "but my source, Ms. Sarah Hayes." She gestured to me, and I stood up, feeling a surge of defiant courage. "Is a resident, and she, along with other concerned homeowners, has some very serious concerns about financial transparency, conflicts of interest, and the waste management contract your HOA has signed." Then, with the precision of a surgeon, Lisa laid out Mark's findings for all to hear. The Shell Corporation, Thomas Finch's directorship, the hugely inflated prices compared to city services, the shocking lack of competitive bids, and the effective monopolization of waste services for personal profit. She presented copies of the flimsy company registration, the exorbitant contract, and even an anonymous tip-off she'd received about Mildred's recent luxury car purchase. The room erupted, tidal wave of outrage. Residents who had been silent for years found their voices, their shouts echoing through the clubhouse, demanding answers, demanding an immediate audit, demanding Mildred's resignation. Mildred tried to bluster, to deny, to threaten legal action against me and Lisa, her face a contorted mask of fury and desperation, but it was useless. The evidence was irrefutable, the public outrage overwhelming. The community finally understanding the true cost of Mildred's trash tyranny, not just in money, but in lost trust and fractured neighborly relations, turned on her. Calls for her immediate resignation, for an independent audit, for a full investigation echoed through the clubhouse. Within weeks, the dominoes fell with astonishing speed. The local news ran a damning complete, with interviews with me and other newly vocal, disgruntled neighbors. The city's waste management department, alerted by Lisa's report, launched its own inquiry into Greenbriar Waste Solutions. Mildred and Thomas Finch were forced to immediately dissolve their shell corporation and face potential charges for fraud and embezzlement. The pressure was immense. Mildred, utterly disgraced, resigned from the HOA board in a huff, her rigid posture finally slumping in defeat. She moved out of Greenbriar Estates entirely a month later, probably to find a new community to terrorize, though I imagine her reputation preceded her. The new HOA board, elected by a galvanized and active community, immediately repealed the restrictive waste rules, reinstated city services, and even started a thriving community composting program managed by volunteer residents. My bins, once symbols of rebellion, were now symbols of progress and community engagement. Greenbriar Estates finally lived up to its name, not just in appearance, but in practice, in its very spirit. It just goes to show sometimes the biggest battles are fought over the smallest things, like a few recycling bins. But when those small things reveal a larger pattern of abuse, control, and outright corruption, standing up isn't just about your rights. It's about reclaiming your community, restoring integrity, and ensuring that common sense prevails. So, if your HOA is throwing trash at your eco-friendly efforts, don't just recycle, revolt. And make sure you expose every last bit of their dirty laundry. What's the craziest thing your HOA has ever tried to fine you for? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of suburban skirmishes and sweet, sweet justice.